Welcome. Thank you for joining the U.S. Data Management Laboratory Practice Best Practice Series webinar. I'm Becky Melody, your hostess for today's session. Ed Riley, subject matter expert for laboratory environments and systems, will be presenting. The discussion today will cover introductions, webinar logistics, direction for post-webinar collaboration, and our discussion topic, electronic laboratory notebooks in pursuit of the paperless laboratory. We're proud to have Ed joining us today, being our presenter. He has been in the pharmaceutical industry for 16 years. Originally working as a chemist in an analytical laboratory, he moved into support of the electronic systems used by the laboratory. He's evaluated, implemented, and supported various systems in the GMP environments. He currently works as a system consultant for a global pharmaceutical company. USDM is focused exclusively on the life science domain. We're the market leader in providing IT, quality, and regulatory IT compliance professional service solutions. We're located in Ventura, California, and we have several practice areas, including IT and virtualization, quality and auditing, nutraceuticals, focusing on 21 CFR Part 111, enterprise content management, ERP, PLM, manufacturing automation and equipment, clinical and drug safety, business intelligence, project management, GRC, and of course, laboratory systems and equipment. We offer hands-on experience assisting clients under regulatory distress, and we're the market leader for validation accelerator packs. Our content today will be covered in 30 minutes, and then we'll invite you to post questions for the team via the iLink message board, which is on the lower left of your screen. Or you can join the discussion on LinkedIn and post any questions there. Of course, if your question is of a confidential nature, we're happy to address that directly offline. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and now we'll turn the presentation over to Ed.
Thank you, Rebecca. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Thank you for joining. Hope you can hear me well. If not, please let me know. So today we're going to talk about, basically give an overview of what an ELN is, what it can do for you in your laboratory, what things it can help you with and improve processes in your areas, what to do if you already have systems in the lab and where it can fit into the overall structure of your laboratory, and some keys to a successful implementation. There are some basic project management issues that are applicable to all systems, but there are some specific issues that are involved with the ELN because it's different from other systems in some ways. So what is an ELN? Basic, obviously, it's an electronic laboratory notebook. The basic definition is the real-time bench-level documentation of the activities that you perform in electronic form. So basically the standard ubiquitous paper notebook that all analysts carry around and are famous for becomes an electronic process. You either sit at a computer or you carry a tablet around, and your raw data capture will be in electronic form rather than put into paper. There are generally two distinct uses for ELNs. There's a research type and the analytical type. The research ELNs have been around for a lot longer than the analytical. They're designed to allow collaboration across different facilities, different analysts. The keyword knowledge mining is pretty hot now. Basically what that is you want to be able to search to see if anyone else is doing experiments so you don't duplicate the effort, or you can build upon something else that someone is doing and not have people stepping on each other's toes as far as experimentation goes. You might want to do something and see that someone else has done it, or you might see results from something else that someone has done and be able to build upon that. Or, you know, if you need to, you see an interesting outcome and you want to maybe take that further or ask questions about it or set up experiments based upon someone else's ideas. So it helps with intellectual property documentation for patent issues, for legal defense. You have a time-stamped audit trail of when things happen, and it's useful for proving point-in-time activities. The key with research ELNs is that they have to be flexible. Research scientists will design experiments. They don't know how the experiment's going to go when they go into it. You can't have a rigid structure. You need to be able to change things around, adjust things, add maybe some pictures or some chemical models, or maybe even a movie player. So you need to make sure that it's not a rigid structure that people can't adjust to fit their needs that they have. In the analytical area, it's basically the opposite. You know every time when you do an experiment what it's supposed to be. There are standard procedures that exist that are supposed to be followed. So in the analytical area, generally you want to impose controls on the execution of the ELN so that everyone follows a standardized process every time. This is an opportunity for you to implement your best practices if you find that people are doing things their own way and you have issues with them not following procedures. If you have a standard process, then it conforms everyone to the same way of doing things. You can also tie in your stock management and your instrument calibration so that if an instrument or a reagent is outside of its use window, that can be flagged. It can prevent someone from using it. It can be taken out of a list of values, or it can be flagged. Also, if there's an investigation to determine that there's maybe some particular vendor lot that's affecting your product, you can query on that. So all the details of the experiment, you can query on those and find all the products that might be affected to make your investigation go smoother. Another key, and I'm guilty of this myself, I should have been a doctor the way that I write. A lot of times you can't read what someone writes, and also they don't write in the standard format that you might want. This helps with legibility because it's all typed in and it's easier to read. As I said before, you generally have standardized method execution in an analytical laboratory. So this helps you enforce the list of values, prevents people from going out of order if there's a certain order that's required for execution. And it also, since it walks people through the process, there's less training requirements involved because it takes them step by step through without them having to learn or memorize it. Also, some people I've seen have implemented a review by exception, where since the process is controlled and everyone's forced to follow a standard process, they'll only review if there's a change in data or if something's out of specification. So rather than reviewing everything, they validated the process so that only when things don't go according to plan do they review these things. This is similar to parametric release in manufacturing, where as long as the tightly defined manufacturing parameters are set and the production process is within those limits, then products can be released based upon that. I'll give you an example of one laboratory where I helped with their automation process. We did an analysis of the current steps, and every one of the notebooks that was submitted for review was returned for corrections. There was not one that ever went through the process that didn't need something changed. In our analysis of LIMS entry, we found 5,500 clerical errors, 2,300 transcription errors, and this was despite the fact that there were peer and supervisor reviews on everything. This is in a lab with a sample flow of about 30,000 samples per year. They also generated 850 logbooks per year, a lot of duplicate entries. There was different logbooks for different purposes, and they shared some data, so data had to be entered into multiple logbooks. And analysts had 30 what I call renegade databases and spreadsheets, basically Access or Excel, that they used to actually do the work they needed to do, because the paper notebooks. They don't allow for analyzing information, so people basically had to re-enter it into these spreadsheets. They didn't like using LIMS. LIMS wasn't useful for pulling stuff out, so in order to get their actual jobs done, they would take the notebooks and re-enter this into spreadsheets and do what they had to do to generate the reports. And, of course, while they're doing that, someone else is looking for the notebook and can't do their next experiment because they need it to continue. So there's a lot of utility in having an electronic notebook in your lab. The question is, what if you already have a LIMS? I think while ELNs are relatively new in the analytical laboratories, LIMS has been around for as long as I've been around, and before that, it's a standard function in the labs. Generally, at least as I have seen it, LIMS takes the role of being basically a final repository of results. So people will do their analysis, write down their raw data, do their calculations in their notebook. Sometimes LIMS will handle that. A lot of times they'll do it in a notebook because they want to find out right away if things pass or fail. And they take the final results and they re-enter it into LIMS. Someone else will approve that, and then it gets reported. These days, I think a lot of LIMS vendors are seeing the value in having the electronic laboratory notebook. So they are adding functionality in there. Every time a new version comes out, there's some extra bit in there that kind of pushes into the ELN functionality. I would absolutely suggest if you have a LIMS system that you would leverage whatever opportunities there are in that one. I can give you another example of a testing laboratory where they were actually printing out the laboratory, what we call the summary report, the final results of the data that they submitted to QA for review. They were printing this out and writing raw data onto the sheet and then entering it into LIMS. So what we did is we implemented an electronic signature. We put workstations around where their instruments are so they can have the computer there and LIMS open while they're doing their experiment, and they entered it directly into the LIMS system, so saving the extra transcription and the review. This is a simple instance, but there are a lot of cases where you can leverage your LIMS system more fully than it probably is being done right now. So basically, when you're looking through your lab and you want to see where an ELN can help you, the thing that I like to say is wherever there's paper in your lab, it's because your systems don't communicate. So you may have incoming samples into the LIMS. LIMS schedules your samples. You print them out. You know what kind of testing you have to do. You do the testing. You re-enter your results in the LIMS. If the samples could be sent from LIMS to your ELN, and you could record your testing in there and the results go into LIMS, there would be no paper. So anywhere where you see paper in the lab, chances are you have systems that are not talking to each other, and this is where you want to look to see where you have opportunity to make those connections. So the keys to a successful implementation, first thing you have to remember is that people have passwords for electronic systems, but passwords are not the same as signatures. An electronic signature is a different thing. It requires different security controls, and the organization actually has to file a certification document with the FDA stating that the electronic signature is the same as the written equivalent. The other thing I would suggest, and I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, is to standardize and streamline your processes before going electronic. The existing processes and procedures were probably defined with paper in mind. There's a lot of requirements for review of things because there's written transcriptions. You may want to look into the opportunity to eliminate some reviews or streamline them if you validate the process of moving data from one system to another. The other thing is to baseline what your current process is. I think you'd be very surprised to see how much of people's effort actually goes into taking care of checking the human error aspect of things, the rewriting, the errors, the not entering things completely, not executing properly, the investigations, the pulling of notebooks to skim through, find data. All these things really add up to a lot of time and effort. And if you capture this up front, you can have a very clear understanding of where you really want to focus your efforts. For instance, in the one area where we had 100% of our laboratory notebooks returned for corrections, that is something we wanted to target. So we made sure that the electronic notebook would clearly require all the different pieces of data that were necessary for the notebook to be okay. Again, like I touched on before, you definitely want to leverage your existing systems. People are already familiar with them. There's probably some functionality available in them. A lot of LIMS vendors, for instance, will have additional modules that handle this type of information. I know that one LIMS system that we used in the lab had an inventory control system. We were able to implement that and get rid of a lot of logbooks and access databases. And also that allowed us to link up with the ELN once we implemented the ELN system. You can also use SDMSs for archiving. The ELN can definitely generate a lot of data and big files, and you need to come up with an archiving strategy. And if you have an SDMS system that handles these types of things, or a document management system, you might be able to leverage those to take some of the pressure off of the system. Also, I would suggest that you start very simply. These things can grow exponentially. There's a lot of effort involved. There's one example in a lab that I worked in where we decided to use automatic pipe header calibrations as our proof of concept, and we saved about 5 hours per month. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it was a very simple thing to do. It took an hour to create a method, and we did a simple validation of it, and then we had the 5 hours to show the types of savings that we could have and also get people familiar with the system. Another thing I would say is do not underestimate the ongoing effort to maintain. Procedures change all the time. If you think about how many people you have supporting each of your systems now, I've seen 3 or more for one site for a LIMS system, and that's just the final results reporting. You're talking about capturing all of the activity that an analyst performs. There's going to be a lot of changes and a lot of effort, and you take into account you're not just going to have savings from the lack of work that you needed to do, but you're going to have a lot of extra maintenance effort required. Also, as I alluded to earlier, there's a lot of disk space requirements. You could have C of A attachments. You could have pictures, chemical models. There's a lot of variability in the type of data that you're now capturing. You could have some very large files, and the size can grow quickly, so you have to be able to anticipate growth and performance of the system. Also, ergonomics. A lot of analysts, don't stay at the bench. They go to the clean rooms, or they travel for environmental monitoring with carts, and they might do some valve testing on water systems. There's a lot of moving around. People don't just sit at their desk. You have to take into account the durability of the hardware that you use. They might want barcoding systems, so you have to look into having barcoding rather than typing into systems. Sometimes the desktops or laptops don't travel very well to where they can be destroyed by the chemicals in the lab. And also, I see a lot of tablets. People think they want tablets, and they wind up not really liking them with having gloves on, or getting them messy, or just not being ergonomic for them. And they also tend to have legs. So you need tight controls. I've been places where they would not allow tablets because they tend to get stolen. So there's the extra security there. And you also have to think about your network structure, whether or not you have network drops in your labs. A lot of the modern labs do. Some of the older ones do not. you might have to implement some wireless so people can move around, and there are security issues there. So this implementation is a new thing, and it can definitely get complex very quickly. Some things that have helped me is to what I call a T-shaped functionality implementation. Basically, this means is you implement a high level of the entire system without going very deep into the functionality of each area. So get the basic system in, and then as you go along, you might add in calculations. You might add in spec pulls from limbs. You might add validation of result entry. You might add sending out of results to limbs, but the basic functionality gets in there first, and then in stage delivery, you add deeper and deeper functionality. You also might want to consider a per process or product implementation so you can focus the efforts and people can not get overwhelmed with a cutoff date where one day you're on paper, the next day you're in the system and it has to work. If you focus on one area, you can perfect it. You can set it up so your process is ideal the way you want it, and then learn from that and apply what you've learned to other processes and continually improve. Also, this is sort of a basic project management thing, but I think people tend to get away from it. You really need a strong vision statement of what you actually want to do. ELNs are a new thing. And a lot of labs don't quite understand. A lot of management doesn't really know what they're about. So you really want to decide ahead of time, have a lot of discussions about what you actually want to get out of this. And the baseline metrics that I alluded to earlier can help you point to this so that when you're having discussions, when you want to change the scope, when you want to go one direction or the other, you bring up the vision statement and you ask how what we're talking about applies to that vision. If it doesn't apply to that vision, you probably should not be talking about it. And to that point, watch for the scope creep. You better put your scope under change management, and anytime you're going to modify it, you should do an analysis on the cost and the schedule. These implementations can just really explode in effort. And make sure you have formal approval of scope changes. Another key that I learned the hard way is that there's the documented process and there's the actual process, and they're not the same by a long shot. So I would say for two reasons, get people who actually work the process involved. Number one is because you can find out what is actually done, and number two, you can actually get them excited about making the change. And if people who are going to use the system are excited about it, then you have a greater chance of success. And that's the general overview. I'm running out of time here. I just wanted to also point out that there is a LinkedIn ELN group. There's over 400 members, but not a lot of discussion. So if anyone's interested in more information or talking about this or just getting to know other people who are interested in the ELN, please feel free to join. And that is it.
Thank you, Ed. Appreciate you sharing the solid information. As Ed mentioned, we will now open the floor to questions. And while you're typing those in, I would remind you that this presentation has been recorded, and it'll be available on the website shortly at usdatamanagement.com. While you're there on the site, you might take a look at the presentations that are coming up across the multiple practices of U.S. data management. We do have another laboratory presentation coming week after next, so feel free to join us for that as well. And there is also a list of our previously recorded sessions, again, across multiple practices, different topics that may be useful to you or other team members or other departments at your facilities. Check them out. Okay, it looks like our first question coming in is from Ravi. Let's see. The question is, should I consider using SharePoint with notebooks?
That's a good question. I'm personally a huge fan of SharePoint, and there's a lot of potential with it. The first thing people will say to you is that it's not validated or it cannot be validated, but there are actual guidelines for Part 11 compliance for SharePoint, so I think that if you like SharePoint, if people use it, then it's something that you probably would want to consider. One of the keys for ELN implementations, or really any implementation, is people liking to use it, people wanting to use it. Microsoft products are ubiquitous in the laboratories and basically all over industry. So if people recognize it, they feel comfortable with it, they're probably more likely to use it. People probably have SharePoint they use right now. The one caveat I would forward is to say that the problem with SharePoint is it has to be custom. I don't know of anyone using SharePoint as a basis for an ELN, so it would probably be something in-house that's customized, and customized solutions may work for you, but they're also harder to maintain. If you search the internet, you can find something from Microsoft for guidance on Part 11 compliance. I think Microsoft.com/health would also have some information on Microsoft in the validator world.
Absolutely, Ed. And I would also offer U.S. Data Management has a sub-practice, if you will, specializing in SharePoint as it integrates and teams with other ECM systems or overall systems within life sciences as well. And we do have a team member on site that leads that sub-practice as a subject matter expert. So if you hit a snag there or have any questions, feel free to connect with me and I'll get you answers from the appropriate USDM team members. Great. Our next question is from Jerry. Let's see. Is an iPad an acceptable choice for implementing ELN?
Yes, everyone loves the iPad. That's actually a very popular question that people ask. There's good and bad. Obviously, we know what Apple's compatibility issues are with software. There's a lot of industry software is geared toward a Microsoft environment. So if there's Flash involved or Java, you might have issues there. If your software works with the iPad, it certainly is a feasible thing. You also want to be worried about wireless connections, so you probably have to set up wireless for that and the security involved in it. And also iPads are very popular, so they could walk out of the laboratory and out of the building. There's issues with them being stolen, but that applies really to all tablets. And there's also the possibility, since they can be taken pretty much anywhere, they can also get into spills or dropped, or there's durability issues there. But certainly it's something that is really specific to the environment, and it certainly could work.
Terrific. Okay, looks like we're coming close to the halfway point of the hour, so we'll wrap up with our last question from Sherry. She'd like to know what format is a good choice for archiving?
That's a good question. It depends on what kind of data you have in there, and you might have, as I said before, an SDMS that does a lot of archiving. You can leverage that. But what I've seen for the most part is if you're just talking about printing things out so that they're available for review later, XML tends to be a widespread standard, and it will probably be readable for a long time. So that's for basic data, that would probably be the most likely choice.
Terrific. All righty. Well, thank you again, Ed. We so appreciate you joining us to present with our team today. And we would invite all of you listening to join the discussion forum on LinkedIn. We appreciate your insight there, and we welcome your feedback and suggestions for future topics. If you did appreciate the information shared today, let us know by clicking on the like button on the USDM LinkedIn group page, or even better, post a comment for us. Should take you just a few seconds, but it would mean the world to us, because in 2012, it's going to be a very important indicator that our management team is looking at and using as a basis to continue whether or not to fund our complimentary webinar series here. So do take a moment and call us with questions, anything that we can do in the way of addressing pain points or offering direction and support, we're happy to hear from you. Thank you for taking the time from your busy day to join us. And on behalf of the U.S. Data Management Team, we certainly appreciate the opportunity to team with you towards excellence in compliance. Have a wonderful day.